And thank you and welcome everyone for joining today's LGBTQ plus Summit Part 2, hosted by the County of Santa Clara and the Santa Clara Office of LGBTQ Affairs. Greatly appreciate y'all joining us today for some awesome panels that we have lined up for y'all. This year's theme is intersectionality, and this is part 2. And if you missed out on part 1, don't worry. We will have those videos available after the recording of part 2 on our YouTube site. Before we get started, we also want to let you folks know a little bit about our language accessibility for folks that are within the default settings. You could feel free to stay there if you want to choose English, or you could actually choose English. I also want to invite folks from our Spanish language access team, as well as our Vietnamese language access team, to be able to come off the mic and give instructions for folks of Vietnamese and or Spanish language access needs.
Vâng, chào quý vị đã tham dự vào cuộc hội thảo thượng đỉnh LGBTQ Summit phần 2. Và nếu quý vị có cần thông dịch thì quý vị có thể vào các phần thông dịch của tiếng Tây Ban Nha hoặc là tiếng Việt để quý vị có thể nghe được các phần thông dịch của cuộc hội thảo ngày hôm nay. Và nếu như quý vị đã mất phần hội thảo phần 1 thì quý vị không phải lo lắng, chúng tôi đã có phần hội thảo này ở trên YouTube. Xin chúc quý vị có cuộc hội thảo thật là vui.
Hola, muy bienvenidos, buenas tardes, bienvenidos a la cumbre de LGBTQ del 2022. El tema de este año es la interseccionalidad. Esta es la parte 2 de la cumbre. Si se perdieron la parte 1, tenemos el video para que todos puedan verlo. Los invitamos a aquellos que quieran escuchar esta cumbre en español, que una vez que se ponga el acceso a la interpretación, marquen el globo y van a elegir español. De esa manera pueden escuchar la interpretación en español. Muchas gracias.
And thank you so much. So, folks, we should have Spanish language and Vietnamese language access enabled when you go to the menu right over here. We also have live transcript closed captions. So feel free if you need to use closed captions, feel free to use that within the settings that are listed within the settings within Zoom. Also to note, in terms of today's Zoom webinar, this is an interactive Zoom event. So feel free to, again, and thank you, Crystal, for highlighting in the chat, feel free to put your name, the pronouns you use, and the organization you represent within the chat. You could also use the raise hand feature if you wanted to come off mute to ask a question. Our folks here at Office of LGBTQ Affairs will be able to call on you if you wanted to come off mute and raise a question. There's also Q&A, so any kind of Q&A that you want to lift up during the panels that we have, both with our abortion rights panels and our barriers to access panels. You could go ahead and put in the Q&A using the Q&A feature in Zoom settings. Now, in terms of our agenda for today, this is what we're going to be talking about today. LaShawn is going to kick us off with some opening remarks on intersectionality. And then we are super excited to bring you a wonderful panel event on abortion rights and LGBTQ plus equity. At around 2:10, we do have special guest remarks. I don't want to spoil the surprise, but that's going to be coming up around 2:10. We'll break at 2:20. Then for the second panel event, that's going to be at around 2:30 with a live panel on LGBTQ plus barriers to access, followed by a summit reflections activity using Mentimeter. So that's a little bit about our summit today. Again, my name is Sarah. I use she, her pronouns. I am the manager for the Santa Clara Office of LGBTQ Affairs, and I will be your lovely host for today's Summit Part 2. I'm going to go ahead and introduce my colleague, Lashana, who's going to talk a little bit about intersectionality and her thoughts on what intersectionality means to her. Go ahead and take it away, Lashana.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Again, my name is Lashana Hornage, Program Manager here at the Office of LGBTQ Affairs, and I use she, her pronouns. Before I get into my thoughts, I do want to just provide you all with the definition of intersectionality. Coined by civil rights scholar Kimberly Crenshaw, intersectionality is an approach largely advanced by women of color that argues that classifications such as gender identity, race, class, sexual orientation, nationality, ability and disability, and others cannot be examined in isolation from one another. They interact and intersect in individuals' lives, in society, in social systems, and are mutually constitutive. For me, intersectionality means more than that. Intersectionality defines in a way who I am. It shows that I'm a person made up of several different parts, several different experiences, and all of those together make me distinctively Lashana. I challenge you all to look at the definition afterwards and kind of see how it resonates with you. Following this kind of discussion of intersectionality, I'm going to go ahead and pass it back over to Sarah so Sarah can introduce our amazing panelists for our abortion rights panel.
Thank you so much, Lashana, and thank you for sharing a little bit about yourself and what intersectionality means to you. So folks, we've been super excited to be able to have this event for y'all. We reached far and wide to get panelists that we absolutely adore. So today we are going to be having an abortion rights panel and be talking about its implications on LGBTQ+ equity. So first up on the stage, I want to bring up Julianna Gonen. Julianna Gonen is the Federal Policy Director at the National Center for Lesbian Rights, responsible for overseeing and advancing NCLR's federal policy initiatives in Washington, D.C. She focuses on the intersection of LGBTQ+ equity and reproductive health, rights and justice, healthcare, religious exemptions, federal non-discrimination protections, and executive branch and judicial nominations. She previously served as Director of Federal Policy and Advocacy at the Center for Reproductive Rights. Everyone, please bring a warm welcome to Julianna. Up next, we have Ana Flores. Ana hails from the vibrant city of Tijuana, Mexico, and has over a decade of experience working with LGBTQ+ advocacy and leadership development. Currently, Ana is the Senior Manager of Inclusion and Education and Engagement at the Human Rights Campaign Foundation. In this role, they conduct training for HRC staff and volunteers on a number of diversity, equity, and intersectionality topics. Outside of work, Ana works with several groups in San Diego providing harm reduction instruction and supplies to sex workers, people experiencing homelessness, and people who use drugs. They have a master's in public policy and women's studies from the George Washington University and serve on the DC Mayor's Advisory Committee on Street Harassment as the Racial Equity Chair. Everybody give it up for Ana Flores. And finally, we have Dianna Zamora-Marroquin. Dianna serves as the Director of Public Affairs for Planned Parenthood Mar Monte. Her career has focused on equity, empowerment, and civic engagement, leading to her development of numerous successful progressive political campaigns, championing the passage of the first in the nation pro-worker piece of legislation, work for a renowned research firm in San Diego, and live in Washington, D.C., working on 2 California members of Congress. Dianna serves on various nonprofit, political, city, and county boards that focus on diversity, equity, healthcare, and women's rights, and currently serves as the president of the Latina Coalition of Silicon Valley. Everybody, give it up for Dianna. And last but not least, introducing our program manager, one who will be facilitating today's conversation on abortion rights. Everyone, give it up to today's facilitator, Lashana Hornage. I'll pass it off to you, Lashana.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Again, I want to echo gratitude for our panelists taking time out their busy work schedules to come here and speak with us on today. Before we get into the meat and bones of our panel, I do want to just preface everyone and state that we do have questions lined up, and for certain questions, just in an attempt to grasp as much knowledge and pull from the expertise of the panelists, I may pose them to specific panelists, or I may pose them to all. Just keep that as a reminder. So I'll preface that before I ask the question. So now let's jump right on into it. It has been a long year for abortion rights in America. From the leaked Supreme Court draft's opinion on reversing Roe versus Wade to the Dobbs decision in June, access to safe abortions have been difficult for many in states across the nation. And I'm going to pose this question to everyone on the panel. How does the Dobbs decision impact the work that you do within your respective organization? Feel free to jump in there, and anyone can volunteer and go first.
I'll go ahead and get started. So it has actually dramatically impacted the work that we are doing. As one of the most trusted names after the American Red Cross, folks look to us for healthcare services, and sometimes, very specifically access to abortion care services. And when these decisions came down, California really became a safe haven where folks knew they could come and they could access care with us and with other organizations, care that was, based on science, care that was inclusive, care that really met the patient where they were. We've seen an increase in the number of patients, not just from California, but also from out of state as a result. So, we've been doing a lot of work preemptively to be able to be in a place where we can care for the influx of patients that we have been seeing, and we know that trend will continue. The other thing I will mention is the stories that we are hearing are truly heartbreaking. Folks are having to drive 17 hours one direction to be able to get to a health center that can provide them abortion care services, and turn around and have to drive back, right? Some of the people that are most impacted are the folks that truly have the least resources available to them. And so it's really disproportionately impacting communities that are already struggling at a rate that is higher than, than others. And so when we see just the life-changing impact that Dobbs has had, where people are getting their right to make decisions that directly impact their family life, their economic life, their educational life, it is dire. And I do not think it's an understatement when we say that this is a life and death situation that we find ourselves in, and that some of our patients do find themselves in.
I'm happy to jump in, and I'm glad you went first, Dianna. It makes sense given that you literally work at a provider of these services that are now banned in at least a dozen states, and some of them, we've just gotten started, right? It's gonna spread. As was mentioned, I work at the National Center for Lesbian Rights, and sometimes people ask me, well, like, why are you working on reproductive rights? That's not something that is relevant to queer people, which of course I have to take a breath and say, well, actually there are a ton of reasons why this is very relevant for queer people and for our organization in particular. And I should say I'm in Washington, D.C., but we were formed and are still based in San Francisco, so not too far from where many of you are. Our organization has always been about family. We were actually formed to fight for the rights of lesbian women coming out of marriage and losing custody of their kids just by virtue of the fact that they were lesbians. They were deemed to be unfit parents because of being lesbian identified. And so we, family and the right to parent is at our core. And so we see fighting for reproductive health rights and justice as part of that. It's literally the flip side. We also don't think anybody should be forced to undergo pregnancy and parenting against their will. And that's literally what is happening now in states across the country, the right to decide something that is the most fundamental personal decision, one of the most fundamental personal decisions someone could make is being taken away. And there are, of course, queer people who need abortion services, and places like Planned Parenthood, independent abortion clinics have been trusted providers to our community. And we also have to think about the broader implications. You know, not only are folks in our community worried about accessing this healthcare, but what does this mean for other core rights that the Supreme Court has recognized and might take away? I mean, it wasn't that long ago that I think a lot of us thought, well, there's no way they're going to overturn Roe versus Wade. I mean, it's been around for almost 50 years, such a fundamental right. So what about more recently recognized rights that directly affect our community, like the right to intimate association, and the right to marriage? And we've actually already seen Dobbs come up in our own litigation work. We have a case in Alabama about transition-related care for minors, and the state has cited Dobbs in its pleadings, arguing that the parents actually don't have a fundamental right to access healthcare for their kids, even though it is accepted by mainstream medical organizations, because they're sort of using that same rationale that really the state should get to decide access to medical care, and that's not a fundamental right. So there are a lot of reasons why this affects our community and how it's directly affecting the work that we do. I'll turn it over to Anna.
Yeah, and I think, Julie, similarly, right, a lot of folks don't necessarily make the connection between the Human Rights Campaign and abortion access. But we're seeing, right, I mean, we know that queer people need access to a lot of life-saving services that, you know, are becoming more and more restricted. And so something that is uniquely important and has shifted for me in the work that I'm doing is really getting our folks, our volunteers, our members, our staff to understand how this is not just about women's rights, right? This is about queer rights. This is about bodily autonomy, right? And understanding, like Dianna said, right, that this is impacting our most marginalized folks in the same way that all issues impact our most marginalized folks most directly, most acutely. And for me, the work ahead looks like, and for our folks, the work ahead looks like, how can we show up as co-conspirators and allies in this work and understand that the issue of abortion access is a queer justice issue, right? Because, well, I mean, I don't think I have to explain it to anyone, but really understanding the overlap and just the innate connections due to the intersectionality of our community, right? Due to all of the different identities that folks hold, this is going to impact and is already impacting so many queer folks' lives in so many ways, and we can't even begin to quantify what that is going to look like in the future. So really just pushing even further for our folks to understand that this is the moment to show up in allyship, show up for our most marginalized folks, and understand that all of these oppressions are interlinked. And there's absolutely no way that we're going to resolve one issue without addressing every single oppression that we are being faced with as a community. Yeah.
Thank you all for such great insight thus far. We're going to stay a little bit longer on the topic of the Dobbs decision. After the Dobbs decision, Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas remarked that landmark high court rulings that established gay rights, quote unquote, such as marriage equality and contraception rights, should be reconsidered now that the federal right to abortion has been revoked. And I'm going to pose this to Dianna and Anna. Should the LGBTQ plus community continue to be on high alert?
So I would say anyone that believes in inclusion and equity and everyone being able to have the right to make the decisions that are best for themselves needs to be on and continue to be on high alert, not just the LGBTQ plus community. They have clearly given us a roadmap of what is next on the chopping block and of what rights they would like to take away. And so we would be remiss if we did not continue to stand together, you know, as Anna mentioned, right? And be in this fight together, because dividing us is exactly how they're going to be able to systematically continue to take rights away little by little. And it's when we come together and we recognize that being together, we have more power. But every single one of the rights that you take away from one impacts another group. And so so I would say, yes, we all need to remain very vigilant. We all need to understand that They are willing, they have shown us, they are willing to do whatever it takes to take away rights from people that we thought were now established and that we had. Everything that we hold dear is on the chopping block, and the people that we love are the ones that are going to be the ones that are hurt. And so from our perspective, you know, this is not an LGBTQ plus issue. It is not a reproductive rights issue, right? It is not a woman's issue. It is an everyone issue. And that is, I think, how we're going to continue to move forward and really fight and be able to protect the rights of everyone that, you know, that we care about. And so that would be my approach to how, you know, how we go about doing this. That's our organizational approach as well. And so when they tell you who they are and they show you who they are, believe them, right? And they have done those things. So it would be remiss if we did not do our part and really stand firm with the things that we believe in and for the people that we believe in.
Oof, ditto. Right? Yes. I mean, the short answer is yes, absolutely. And you know, as this conversation has been unfolding and as we're talking about it, you know, at HRC and in LGBTQ spaces, I started hearing, you know, this feeling, or the folks were voicing a concern that, you know, they're coming for us next, right? They're coming for LGBT folks next. And my answer to that is they're already coming for us, right? It's not that we're next, is that we're included in the folks that they're coming for right now, right? And again, just reinforcing for folks that this decision affects so many queer people, right? So many folks, not just women, but who are non-binary, anyone who has the capacity to give birth, really, or who has someone in their lives who has the capacity to give birth, right? There's so many different facets to this issue, and just getting folks to understand, again, that this is an intersectional issue. I mean, I think that's why this is the point of the panel, right? This is an intersectional issue that, again, we need to face together, because we hold so much more power as a community when we stand together, fighting for all of our rights, and not waiting to be picked off one by one, right? Because ultimately, they're coming for all of us. Yeah.
I think just the only thing I would add is that this is about control.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's exactly that's all it's about. It's about them controlling us, whoever you want the us to be, right? And so when they take away things like contraception, that's the most basic way that people that can give birth can control what is happening to them. And so if you want to take away my ability to access abortion services, and then you also want to take my ability to preemptively take care of myself, you have literally taken the control completely away from me. And I can no longer make decisions about my own life that are fundamental to who I am as a human and the type of life I want to live. And you've rendered me just this shell of a person with no rights and no ability to make decisions that are going to impact me and my family.
I know that Julie has something to add to this conversation, so we would love if Julie can share with us.
Oh my gosh, so much. Yeah, and like Anna said, it's not that they're coming for us, they've been coming for us, they're here now. So to your question, Lashana, should our community be on high alert? Absolutely, but at the same time, it's not happened yet. So the obvious thing that the sort of straight up LGBTQ concern has been, oh, he mentioned marriage equality, he mentioned the Lawrence decision, are those next? And they very well might be, but I don't want people to like run out and get married tomorrow if you're not ready for that, because you think marriage equality might disappear. And I know it sounds a little bit flippant, but for real, like that's something that we in the movement have to worry about. When people think they're going to lose something, what do they do in response to that? And we need to kind of walk a little bit of a fine line between saying, yes, be concerned, it could happen, but also it's not happening tomorrow. And I know my organization, HRC, Planned Parenthood, we're all going to be on the front lines trying our best to stop it if they do come. But and I guess what I want to just add, maybe my perspective as a lawyer, kind of what bothers me about the way Justice Thomas and Justice Thomas in particular in his concurring opinion, he's been an opponent of this thing called substantive due process for a very long time. That's just sort of legal language for an interpretation of the Constitution that says, we can find protection for rights even if the words aren't there, right? There's no word for abortion in the Constitution. There's no word marriage in the Constitution, but there are fundamental principles there that you can't help but deduce that, well, of course, things like that are so personal to our very identities have to be protected when you have something like protection for liberty in the Constitution. But Justice Thomas does not agree with that. He thinks, if the words aren't there, it does not exist. And he's not alone in that. And so that's where some of these other decisions come in, like, well, what about marriage equality? What about the ability to be sexually intimate with the person of your choice? And the way that the majority opinion and a lot of critics of Roe v. Wade talk about that decision just drives me crazy because it's so inaccurate. They make it seem like Roe was this thing that just fell out of the sky one day and has no connection to other constitutional decisions. But the truth is it sits squarely in the middle of a 100-year tradition or trajectory of the court finding protection for fundamental rights in the Constitution, rights for things like how you want to raise your kids. Do you want to live in your home with extended family? Who do you want to marry? Whether you should be forced to take leave if you've given birth, things like that, all that are kind of this constellation of things that really go to our identities and our families. Roe v. Wade built upon 50 years of case law, and 50 years of case law followed that built on Roe, sometimes cases that had nothing to do with abortion. So when they try to pull it out and make it seem like it was some bizarre outlier, as I said, it drives me crazy because it's inaccurate. And so that's also why we have to think what else could be next if they really just think, if the majority of the Supreme Court, and they apparently do think that rights that you can't see in the text don't exist, then we all really do need to be worried. So I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but yes, we do need to be worried.
Thank you all so much. Sitting right here in this space and leaning into how the different constitutional decisions intersect and impact and imply different things when it comes to legislation and rights for individuals of the LGBTQ+ community. I want to hear from all of the panelists. What connections exist between LGBTQ+ equity and social justice movements and abortion rights? What are some misunderstandings you've encountered about reproductive rights in relation to transgender and non-binary communities? Maybe we can start with Dianna.
Well, I think one of the things that we're really proud of as an organization is that folks, regardless of where and how they identify, come to us. And the questions that we have for them have nothing to do with that part of who they are, right? It is about the care that they are seeking. And I mention that because oftentimes we've heard that folks will go to, their primary doctor or someone else that they've been receiving care from, and the bulk of the conversation is, well, but I don't understand, or like it's about how they identify versus really just understanding that that's kind of not relevant, right? They're seeking medical care, and as a doctor, your job is to care for them. So I bring that up because I've had multiple stories sort of, about that. And I think too, there's misunderstandings, many snap judgments are made when people based on how someone looks, right? And so oftentimes the community at large, just, like the population, don't understand that certain people, just because they look one way on the outside doesn't mean that they don't need services that someone like me might look like, right? And so I think there's a bit of an education, there in terms of understanding that you cannot decide what kind of care a person needs just based on what you're seeing. And so those, I think, are some of like maybe the community misconceptions that are part of the educational process. And again, as I mentioned, just the need to have a place where you can go that you are going to get adequate, friendly, scientifically accurate, compassionate care, regardless of that, because that's not the important part, right? The important part is your health.
And I think speaking specifically to the connection and the overlap between, non-binary and trans communities and women's rights and abortion access, I think what Dianna said earlier in answer to one of the questions, this is about control, right? In the same way that folks on the right or conservative folks are trying to legislate and define what trans people and non-binary people and families and kids can do with their own bodies and have agency over their lives. This is the same kind of thing, right? This is about controlling people's bodies, controlling their access to life-saving services that they need in order to survive, right? And so we see this across the board, right? This has been one of the most terrible years as far as state legislation for anti-trans legislation, right, across the board. We also know that anti-trans violence, right, is directly linked to all of these things. If you hear all of this terrible rhetoric coming from your legislators, coming from folks in power, right, it really spurs transphobic folks to go out and commit violence. And I mean, to add a little bit of a personal note, I'm a non-binary person and I'm currently pregnant, which is just such a fascinating, has been such a fascinating experience because folks don't know what to do with me in doctors' offices, just all over the place, right? It's been really interesting having to challenge folks' expectations of what my gender should be, of what my gender is, of how I should be identifying, and just really having a firsthand experience at how much folks really have to learn still, and reminding us, right, that this is about bodily autonomy. This is about the ability to be able to control how we live our lives, what we do with our bodies, who we do it with, and ultimately that is at the core of this issue. So yeah.
Yeah, I spend a lot of time thinking about the connection between reproductive health rights and justice and LGBTQ liberation and equality, in part because, as was mentioned, I did work at the Center for Reproductive Rights. Now I'm at NCLR, and I feel like I get to work on all the things that I'm most passionate about, which are the very things we're discussing today. And I mean, I have this list, this sort of standard list I go to when I'm asked, well, what are these connections? What are these intersections? Many of which we've already touched on. You know, queer people do need access to reproductive health care. So obviously we need places like Planned Parenthood and the independent abortion clinics to be around for us. And some of these folks like have actually, in addition to the reproductive health care, actually have dedicated health programs for LGBTQ people and for trans people in particular. And many of them have done it because they understand about providing stigmatized healthcare to people who don't always get good care in the mainstream healthcare system. I heard one independent abortion provider describe it as, you know, stigma are us. There's nobody who understands stigma in healthcare better than abortion providers, and they see needs in their communities and they step in to provide it. So that's been a really cool thing to see as well. As is mentioned, our movements are all about the same thing: bodily autonomy and being able to be in control of our own destinies and not having somebody else do that. The other thing we really do that's I think we have in common is challenging gender norms. It's sort of maybe a little bit more obvious in the LGBTQ context. I mean, we fall in love with and marry someone of the same sex. Even today, that's still considering sort of pushing against gender norms. Choosing to live as your true identity and not your sex assigned at birth challenges gender norms. I would say also having an abortion challenges gender norms because, again, I think broader society, let's face it, they're not usually thinking about trans and non-binary people having abortions. They see it as something that women do. And those who are opposed, I think the reason they oppose it is because it's breaking out of a role that they think women are supposed to embrace, that childbearing is supposed to be the number one thing. You put everything else aside. So seeking abortion care pushes against gender norms. That's another thing that our movements have in common. And then, of course, there's all those legal cases I was just talking about. Our rights, the rights have been recognized, although they're, you know, that's shifting beneath our feet as we speak, really come from the same parts of the Constitution. And I'll just flag one other thing that's sort of interesting, not interesting in a good way, but potential implications of the Dobbs decision is for not just abortion per se, but other kinds of reproductive health care and access to assisted reproduction. So a lot of queer families use assisted reproduction, things like in vitro fertilization, to form families because, you know, it's not going to happen through traditional heterosexual sex. And as states really move aggressively to ban and outlaw abortion, anything that looks like abortion to them, you know, maybe even embracing personhood again, that could threaten or limit altogether the ability to access things like in vitro fertilization. So there's just a lot of ways in which this matters very much to our community.
Wow, thank you all so much. All of the responses I've heard thus far have provided an easy segue into the next question I want to pose for any of you all to answer. We know that language evolves, especially in the LGBTQ+ community. We've heard abortion rights referred to as women's rights, reproductive rights, gynecological care. We've also heard abortion patients being referred to as birthing people, people with uteruses, and childbearing individuals to try to become more inclusive. Do any of you have inclusive language best practice recommendations to ensure that lesbian, bisexual, and queer women, trans men, intersex people, and non-binary and gender non-conforming people are included?
this may not be the answer, the easy answer that folks are looking for, but I think that whenever it comes to language and how we're identifying people, I think about this a lot, right? Because language changes and language varies depending on so many different factors, right? Geography, age, personal preference, access to language, just so many different things that could influence or affect the way that people identify themselves or like to be identified by other people. And so my rule really is to ask people what it is that they want to be called, what language an individual prefers, because if we know one non-binary person's, one trans person, one woman's experience, that is their singular experience, and we can't necessarily generalize it to everyone. That's not best, I mean, that is best practice. That's not necessarily the answer to your question. But I just think that in general, when we're talking about, signifiers and words to identify our folks and words that people can use to identify themselves, it really, in my experience, is best to give folks the flexibility that they need to be able to identify themselves, because different language will resonate with different folks for different reasons, and that's okay. But that's my answer, right? That I don't know if other folks have a better or more a different answer, but that's what I would say. Yeah.
I think you have to tailor it to the situation and consider who your audience is. And I completely agree, Anna, when you're talking about an individual and you have the opportunity to learn from them how they identify, then absolutely that should carry the day. It gets a little more challenging when we're trying to make more general statements about the kinds of people who need certain kinds of healthcare. And I sometimes, I don't know, I think it is challenging because there's definitely, we need to be inclusive, and we want to make sure that everybody who needs the care knows where to go to get it and knows that they're going to be welcome when they get there. I've been a little reticent about what I sometimes see as attempts to make all references to abortion care and reproductive health care gender neutral. And I know it's out of a goal to be inclusive, but I think that there are some real downsides to that. And part of it links back to something I said before. I really do think a lot of the opposition, I mean, we should never give them the credit of calling them pro-life. They're not pro-life, they're pro-control and pro-putting people into boxes and gendered boxes. And I think if we start to use completely gender neutral language when we talk about particularly abortion restrictions, we're letting them off the hook because they are being driven by a certain kind of gender ideology. And I think we need to recognize that. They're also used the term signaling. I think if you look at the name of, other than Planned Parenthood, which of course is a really known brand, independent abortion clinics also often have the word women in their name. I mean, I don't think you can find one that's called the blah, blah, blah abortion clinic. It's usually the women's clinic or women's health something, and that there is a signaling effect there. And I think that's been a challenge for people who run those clinics because they want to hold on to that because it means something, but they also don't want to turn people away. They don't want to signal that certain people aren't welcome. So, I do think that in a lot of progressive movements, we always talk about centering those who are most affected. And I think if we refuse to talk about women, then we're not doing that because I think, the majority of people who need abortion care do identify that way. So it's a really good question and the answers are evolving. I think probably the best thing we can do is just have the best intentions and be open to different options and, consider the audience and the situation.
And quickly, just to add, be responsive to feedback as well, right? Because we can, come up with the best language that we possibly can, and someone might not respond to it. And so if they're open to giving us the feedback of saying, hey, that doesn't necessarily represent me or whatever, being able to learn from that, because that's such an incredible gift, right? Of being able to learn from folks who are actually experiencing these marginalizations. Yeah.
Absolutely. In sticking to the conversation about inclusivity across the LGBTQ+ community, many schools, government, and private institutions are implementing free menstrual products in women's and all gender restrooms. While this is a step in the right direction in menstrual product equity, having products available and access in all men's restrooms is just as important for trans men, intersex people, and non-binary and gender non-conforming people. What can public and private institutions do to ensure that all feel safe and included when it comes to accessing menstrual products? And if any of you have anything to provide here, feel free to just jump off mute Seems like a thinker. Do you have something, Anna, you want to share with us?
So, this is not necessarily my my field day to day. And so I think that just generally, I would say we need better education all around, because folks might not even understand, right, why it's important to have these, not just, have them everywhere. That's just, have them as accessible as possible, and have maybe an education campaign that goes along with it that says, like, this is what, right, like destigmatizing these topics that often just like folks don't even know how to have a conversation around them. And that's not a very eloquent answer, but really just have them everywhere, have them available for anyone who could possibly need them, and not question folks as to why do you need this, or why are you asking for this, or, just that. Yeah, it's not a very eloquent answer. Sorry. It's what came to mind.
I definitely wasn't seeking eloquent. You're here for your expertise. So anything you say will be perceived as eloquent. And I totally agree that just put them everywhere. And if it doesn't apply, let it fly. We're going to change gears a little bit. This year's LGBTQ summit theme is intersectionality. What does intersectionality mean to you all?
Well, I think if I put it sort of in the context of the work that we do, so just sort of looking at it from and focusing it from that lens, oftentimes we are in community in spaces where folks don't expect to see us. So, i.e., housing issues, right? Or wage issues. And we feel that those issues matter and are intersectional to the work that we do, because if you do not have a job that pays you well, if you do not have access to health insurance, if you are unhoused, your ability to access healthcare decreases, your quality of life, the quality of the healthcare you receive oftentimes decreases. It's less accessible. And so again, kind of in that narrow focus of intersectionality, for us, a lot of just the overall work that's being done in the community with other community-based organizations is really important to the work that we do, because it is a reflection of the folks that we serve in our communities, right? The people that come in, our college students who are living in their cars because they can't afford a place to live, folks that don't have enough access to food, which means that if you're a young child, you're not able to concentrate, you're not able to develop all, right? All of those tie back to health, reproductive, mental, overall health. And so, when I think about it, again, in sort of like the silo or in the space of the type of work that we do in our health centers and the work that we want to continue to do in the community, that's a space that I think is really important, because it also goes to show that we are a trusted community member on a variety of issues, right? And that we want to collaborate and we want to bring everyone up in these spaces.
I think that there's going to be a lot of different ways to look at intersectionality and different ways to apply it to the work that we're doing to our personal lives. Lashana, what you said at the beginning, right, about intersectionality allowing you to bring your full and authentic self to the work that you're doing and to spaces, I think that's so important. And definitely a huge facet of intersectionality. And I think another one really is looking at intersectionality as a tool, right? Like as a framework to analyze power and oppression, and to see how power collides in front of us and how oppression shows up in everyday life. And really, I think, what I say to our folks all the time, and I do a lot of trainings around intersectionality, so, but what I say all the time really is just intersectionality is a way to allow us to do our work in a way that is truly impactful, right? Because we have seen movements throughout history that have definitely gained rights and access to a lot of different things for a lot of different groups of people, and yet oppression remains, right? And ultimately, it's the most marginalized that we have not been able to help. or help as deeply or help as thoroughly, right? And so intersectionality gives us a way of really understanding the root cause of problems and how oppression interlinks to really be able to get to the heart of an issue. Oh yeah, thank you, Sarah. Right, to really be able to get to the heart of an issue and understand how we start untangling this mess of oppression that is before us, and start pulling away and chipping away at that work, right? And really be able to understand how oppression and power is interacting in front of us and happening, right? It's not just these nebulous concepts that exist, it's everyday choices, it's everyday situations. And intersectionality really allows us to see that. If we implement it as a tool, kind of like glasses that we put on, right? We're able to see what is actually in front of us. And I think that's just huge. Yeah.
And I think it creates some opportunities for allyship. I was thinking about it in terms of people, like people don't fit neatly into boxes. And as you said yourself, Shoshana, at the beginning, there are a number of aspects of our identities, and they can be both cause for celebration and the source for discrimination and mistreatment by others. Like the very same things that we want to celebrate ourselves are things that other people use to try to keep us down. And our various aspects can interact with themselves. And so we're not just women or people of color or people with disabilities. Like you could be all of those things at the same time. I think I was thinking about what I said earlier about the fact that I do think it's about, we've all said this, it's about control, and it's also about sort of enforcing certain gender roles that sort of is the through line to all of this. And that really creates some opportunity to think about who's not here. And if we work together and we sort of create some non-traditional partnerships, we can be a lot stronger. Because if you really see that what's driving our opponents in all of these movements, and often it's the same people, it is this desire to keep us in a certain framework, a certain way that's probably hundreds of thousands of years old. And if we realize that it's the same kind of motivation they have driving opposition to trans healthcare, opposition to abortion care, opposition to contraception, then you really just suddenly realize there are a lot of people who I could be working with on this issue, because really it's all part of the same umbrella, under the same umbrella.
Continuing in this thought pattern for intersectionality, not only do we discuss this in relation to community, but oftentimes we have to think about it in relation to our family and loved ones and individuals close to us. We know sometimes it's about that time for that dreadful or not so dreadful holiday dinner conversation. We're in November, and that means people are traveling home for holidays. So keeping that in mind, do any of the panelists have recommendations on having reproductive conversations on abortion rights with friends or family should the topic come up this holiday season? Maybe I'll just take one response.
I'll give my thoughts on this. So I think sometimes it's important to remember that it's not about like converting as much as maybe it's just about educating and perhaps having someone accept, right? A bit more, maybe not completely, but a bit more. And I mentioned that because they are topics that are very sensitive. They are rooted in a variety of sort of beliefs and issues. And oftentimes, if someone is truly willing to have a conversation where they do want to learn and they do want to listen, then I think there is room to be able to expand someone's horizon, explain to them sort of the different scenarios in which services could be needed, explain to them the different types of people that seek these services, right? We don't fit. Every person that seeks abortion services is not the same. Their lived experience is different. Their story is different. How they got to, walking into our health center is different. And so I think that sometimes enlightening folks and just sharing those stories can be really helpful in helping sort of soften the outside and giving them an opportunity to take in the information. The flip side of that is sometimes folks don't actually want to listen and they just want to be combative. That is not a good use of turkey time, right? realize that like you are going to be upset, they are going to be upset, the family's going to have a problem, and they're just really seeking to, again, like, to be combative. So, also just recognize who you're speaking to and who the audience is. But I do think that oftentimes being able to share any stories and just sort of put a human face on it, and be educational in your conversations can really help someone start to understand a different perspective, even if they don't fully accept it or buy into it, but that they do recognize that different walks of life, different lived experiences cause different folks to sometimes get to the same place, but in very different ways, which is why we need to continue to not only protect that access, but expand it.
Thank you so much, Dianna. I probably couldn't have put it together any better than that. And speaking to intersectionality, I do want to uplift the intersection when we look at language and accessibility. We know that Santa Clara County has a diverse immigrant population. Many families come from Latin and Asian monolingual backgrounds. In fact, the County of Santa Clara has created a language access unit to support language accessibility, including translation and interpretation services for Spanish, Vietnamese, Chinese, and Tagalog. Do any of you have any advice on navigating abortion rights conversations with communities of varying ethnicities, nationalities, religions, socioeconomic status, backgrounds, etc.? And we know it'll be layered, but just some basic ground rules or advice or recommendations we can take from this when we're looking to continue to create greater access for those communities.
One of my rules is whenever I'm talking to anyone is, am I saying this in a way that my grandmother could understand? Right? Because she has a third grade education, right? And she only speaks Spanish. So, right, am I saying this? Am I using language that is going to be accessible to the most amount of folks? And I know that there's so many incredible resources out there that actually outline how to have conversations with folks around different social justice topics in different languages that give you vocabulary in different languages, right? And these are just like circulating social media. They're really easy to find. I think that's an incredible resource, but also just remembering to keep language accessible, to keep the heart and the point of your message really doesn't have to be about facts and figures. It's about stories. That's what really moves people. And if you can make it personal for them or show how it has impacted your life or someone that you care about, I think we do a training around interrupting oppression. And that's one of the biggest things that we tell people, right, is yelling at someone is not going to change their mind. Showing them, presenting them with all of the most up-to-date data is not going to change their mind. Making it personal to them, the people that they care about. And if it's your own family, they care about you probably, right? And so making it personal and really bringing in the human aspect, I think is translate across all cultures and all languages.
Anyone else have anything to add there?
I think I was thinking about the question you asked before about the turkey conversations and this too. I think there's sort of a similarity there in that I think you have to, as Dianna said, it's not necessarily about changing someone's deeply held opinions. Like, I honestly don't really care that much if somebody is anti-abortion. What I care about is if they try to put those views in the form of public policy that controls someone else's life. So I think just emphasizing that there's a difference, that your religious beliefs, your faith, your morality, your values are what they are, and that's fine. But when we live in a pluralistic society where we do have people with so many backgrounds, speaking different languages, have different views on this, that the way we have to all be able to live together, and that I can be okay with your views on abortion as long as you don't try to control other people's lives by memorializing that in public policy. And that's like probably the lawyer in me speaking. But I think we do have to have humility about the fact that people do come from different places, and we don't need to change their minds. We need to be able to have a conversation.
I totally agree. Before we move into Q&A in about 3 or so minutes, I do want to just lastly ask the panelists, do you all have any recommendations or resources for the audience that would provide them some pathway to get involved in abortion rights or menstrual product equity for all? should they choose to become a large advocate after now?
I think it probably depends where folks are. I mean, you may, if you're in a state like California, you know, the providers in your community are probably, well, I was going to say they're fine, except they're probably getting, as Dan, I think, mentioned, a big influx of people from other places. So find out what your local abortion provider needs. You know, they might need escorts. They might not. They might need something else. They might need help getting their files organized on a weekend, like whatever, because they're all, you know, strapped for resources. But also I think about the patients, you know, if money is a way that you can get involved, there are a number of places you can devote your resources, like practical support networks, abortion funds that are trying to help people. And they were already so critical even before the Dobbs decision. And now people, as Dianna also mentioned, have to travel so much farther to get to care. They need help. And there is an infrastructure in place to get that help to people, but they need resources. So I have a few links here on my computer that maybe I will go on mute and drop a few in the chat if that's okay, because yeah, I think it would be great to plug people into these.
That would be amazing. Thanks, Julie.
Plus 100 to what Julie just said. I also want to put in a shameless plug for the Human Rights Campaign. So we have steering committees and volunteer leaders all over the country that are actively mobilizing to do this work, to support abortion providers and healthcare providers all over the country. And so that's an existing structure, you know, with the infrastructure and with all of the resources that come with HRC that's already there, that folks could plug into. And again, it really doesn't matter where you are, right? Because we have steering committees all over the country, and in places where there are more, you know, secure rights for folks, they're mobilizing to help states that do not have secure access, right? And so it really is, we're seeing an incredible collaboration of our volunteers throughout the country to mobilize and really collaborate in a really, really impactful way. So I'll also put a link in the chat to that. That was my shameless plug. Yes.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Anything to add, Dianna?
Yeah, I will also follow Anna in the shameless plug category. So as the largest affiliate in the entire country, which is a wonderful honor to have, but with that comes a lot of challenges because we cover areas like the Bay Area, but we also cover areas like Bakersfield and Merced and Fresno. And the ability for folks to access care varies, right? And the elected officials in those areas also hold very different beliefs. And so there is work that can still be done in certain areas of California. And I will say, you know, we have opportunities. Obviously, you know, the ability for folks to financially contribute varies per person. But, you know, we do have trainings on who we are, how to tell your story, whether it's your own abortion story or whether it's a story as an ally. And so we have opportunities if folks would like to go and speak at events and sort of share, you know, what's going on there. As well as, you know, as Julie mentioned, we do have like escorts and ambassadors, right? So there are things that that folks can do locally. And I'll go ahead and pull in one of I'll link in that as well. But there's lots of stuff that's happening, right? And I think the important thing to remember is California is really like that high point that a lot of the other states look to see what can be done. So if they continue to see our folks active and engaged, I think that's also very powerful, whether they're engaged here or whether they're Californians going out and, you know, and going to other states. But just knowing that, like, we're not taking anything for granted, I think is a really impactful and powerful tool that we have that is uniquely ours.
Thank you all for that wonderful information on resources. I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to my colleague, Crystal. Crystal is going to raise the burning questions we have over in the Q&A section.
Hey everyone, my name is Crystal Haney. I use she, they pronouns, and I'm a community worker with the Office of LGBTQ Affairs. So we do have a few questions in the Q&A. So from an anonymous attendee, are there practical tips on how to be respectful, inclusive, and supportive while working for a neutral public agency? It would be particularly helpful to help navigate when there's resistance over time from individuals within the agency who feel it is political. So I'm going to open this up. And who would like to take this?
So I think, and I apologize because I was trying to get the link and put it in there. So from the part that I did catch, I think there's a few things that folks can do to sort of kind of, I don't want to say protect themselves, right? But kind of separate themselves a bit from that is just ensuring that the work that you are doing sort of is done. If it doesn't fit with the mission of your organization, doing it after hours or on the weekends, right? So that there is no perceived notion of of some sort of conflict, right? I think it's also really important to find maybe those folks that you do work with that share those similar beliefs and that similar passion with you, so that you have people that you can bounce ideas off of, and that you can talk to things or talk to about things. I recognize, and I think probably Anna and Julia are in the same spot. That our jobs allow us like to be active and openly active in those spaces where other folks don't have that. And so, the other thing is, always reach out to organizations like ours or Anna's or, NCLR, where those folks can also help guide you in terms of opportunities that are available and maybe how to best navigate that. Because it is important to keep your passions important and to stand up for what you believe in, right? And not feel that you have to be silenced. And then the flip though too is just, if your organization, I think is in some ways also taking stances, right? Like then it can create a little bit of like a conflict of interest. But those are always things that we're happy to work through with folks who want to be involved and want to be engaged, so that we can help them manage, what that looks like. Because we obviously never want to put people in a position or have them feel like they're in a position where they cannot, follow their beliefs and be active in their community, and because of potential repercussions.
So I'm going to bring up another question. So how do you communicate, or better yet, what do you say to people that seek to understand more about the importance of defending LGBTQIA rights everywhere? And how to and where to learn more about LGBTQIA+ inclusivity, equality, equity, and systemic barriers. I'm going to address this one to Anna.
Yeah, so those are both really good questions. I mean, I think that to answer the first question, right, is really important to humanize this issue for folks and help folks understand that LGBTQ+ people are your friends, your neighbors, your coworkers, right? People that you care about. We are everywhere. And it's really, really important that we're fighting for our rights everywhere, because that's where we are, right? And so you probably already know us. You probably know a lot of us. And it's just maybe that you're not aware, right? And how to and where to learn more. I mean, I do, and our organization does so many different kinds of trainings, workshops, webinars. We have so many resources. And so I'll just say, I'll put my email in the chat. Reach out. I am available. I love doing this kind of work. It's also my job, right? I get paid to do this kind of education and this kind of service for the community. So reach out, and I am happy to either provide the resource that you need or put you in touch with the person that can provide the resource. Yes, exactly, right. So yeah, let me do that.
And I got you too, Julie. You are up next.
Well, there are so many organizations within the movement. It might depend on what your particular concern is. I mean, there are family equality focuses on queer families. There are organizations focused on youth, like Trevor Project and True Colors Fund, and we spend a lot of our energy and work on families. There's really something for everyone, and I think Anna's right. Like, we can be your gateway to hook you up with the resources. There's PFLAG, of course. Everybody knows and loves PFLAG, and there's still a role for PFLAG now. So there's probably an organization either nationally like ours or locally. There are state equality groups who are more dialed into the specific needs and things going on in your state. Like if you want to get involved in legislative issues. Yeah. So again, happy to be a resource.
Okay. And we're going to move on to another question here. I think I'm going to also start again with you, Julie. With the intersectionality in mind, what advice do you offer to multiply marginalized people that are also at high risk within the reproductive justice becoming more restricted, especially focusing on intersections of race, gender, sexuality, and disability?
Let's see, that seems like a loaded one. So what resources to folks who are kind of living in a place of multiply marginalized identities? Well, I mean, some of it might segue back a little bit to the last answer too. There are organizations probably within your community, and if you don't know who they are, you can start with us and maybe be linked back down. I think right now, one of the things that I noticed doing advocacy work during the Trump administration and now on certain issues now, even though we're not there anymore, I did see a more working across movements and networks, a sort of a sense that, we are all under attack and they want to divide us and we can't let them do that. So I think there is just more of a sense within progressive communities now of working together and realizing about the multiple ways that people are often attacked. So I do sort of federal policy work that's very macro, but we have, and I'll put it in the chat in a second, I'll grab the number. We have a helpline at our organization for people who are experiencing challenges. And even if you're not sure, well, is this an LGBTQ issue I'm facing or is it something else? We also network with legal services organizations around the country. So again, that's a little bit of our lens, but we connect people with resources. That's the whole point of the helpline, because not everybody knows how to, dial up a lawyer at a big firm or find your local legal aid organization. So I'll put that in too. So we can be at least a start or the first stop on that journey.
Thank you so much, Julie. I'm going to hop over to Dianna for that one.
Yeah, I think so from where we stand, we definitely we've been expanding our care to better reflect the needs of the community, right? And we're going to continue to do that. I put in the chat earlier, we now have gender affirming care in all of our health centers and the mental health care services as well. And so, part of the work that we're doing is trying to understand the continual needs of our community. Another example of that is telehealth. During COVID, we saw, I want to say it was something like maybe 75% or plus of the work that we did was folks coming to us to seek services via telehealth, right? Because then we could really meet folks where they were, whether they were essential workers that were having to work, whether they were, first-time moms with infants that couldn't leave the house. And so we are continuing to do the work that we can to meet our folks wherever they are. The other thing too, I will mention is, we're very lucky to have a staff whose whole goal is to help, right? And so if folks come to us, if we end up not being the right venue, we have wonderful partners out in the community that we will find, much like Julie was saying, right? Like we will find where you need to go to access the service that you need. We will not just say, sorry, that's not us, next call. And so even if we can't be the folks that give you what you need, we will definitely work to make sure that you are connected with those so that we can continue to be, a trusted sort of community partner. And so we always encourage people, if they have questions, to please feel free to, to call, to come in, to ask us, so that we can make sure that we're getting you where you need to be, whether it's through us or whether it's through, another organization that's in the area.
All right, great. And Anna, I will leave that with you.
I mean, I can't add anything more than what's already been said, I think that we I don't personally do this work day to day, but you know, I mean, just in getting people resources, right? I'm much more focused internally on training our folks. But again, right, there's so many resources out there, and I can say that if I don't personally have an answer or a resource for you, I will do my best to you know, connect you to the folks that will, right? And I think that what I ditto to Dianna and Julie is just all I can say. Yeah.
All right. I'm gonna pass this back over to LaShawna.
Thank you so much, Crystal, for raising those questions. Before I pass it over back to Sarah to take us into the rest of programming, I do have one last final question for all of the panelists here. If you could provide any takeaways for our audience today from our session, what takeaway would you provide to the audience, something that you think they should hold on to after conversation today that could help them become stronger advocates for reproductive rights and menstrual equity for those of the LGBTQ+ community?
I think today has been a great example of how we do not work in silos, right? We work as a community because we care about the community and we reflect the community. And so I think the one big takeaway would be there is no wrong way to get involved. There is no wrong organization to get your foot in the door with, right? Just do it. We are all doing this work. We are not going to stop doing this work. And we've got some wonderful victories that we can claim, but we do have a lot of work ahead of us. And so at any moment, if folks want to be involved, they have questions, just reach out, because we are all here. We are connectors by nature. And that is what we want to do, right? We want to connect the community. We want to empower the community. We want to give the community a voice. We want them to really be the ones standing at the forefront using that voice. And so for me, it was wonderful to be able to sit with Anna and Julie and listen to all the work they do and how much of it really coincides with the work that we're doing. So that for me would be the takeaway, is just this is a community effort, and it doesn't matter which one of us you call one of us and we will get you started.
Yeah, to echo that, I mean, there are so many ways to do this work, big and small, right? Whether it's at the legislative level, where, you know, the political work just has so many different aspects, from conversations one-on-one with our families during turkey time, right? Have just showing up consistently, I think, is the most important thing, and recognizing that regardless of how we're plugging into this work, it's important that we do. And it's important that we not lose hope, because hope is a practice, right? We may not see the outputs and the outcomes of our work tomorrow or the week after, but we have to remember that we are currently enjoying the benefits of the work that people before us have done that we have never met, and we are working for people that we likely will never meet, and that's okay, because this is the right thing to do, and we must choose justice in every moment that we can. Yeah.
I don't know that I can top that. I think that's exactly right. And, you know, in the face of something as devastating, and as I said, that was very recently as unthinkable as Roe versus Wade being overturned, just know that it's not over. It's a tremendous setback, and it feels like kind of the end of the road, because, well, where do you go from the Supreme Court? Well, things can change, and it might take time, and we might feel that we're back on our heels now. But, you know, we are, as we've been emphasizing throughout this, I think we are one movement, those of us fighting for LGBTQ equality and for reproductive health rights and justice. It's all the same thing. And we've learned in the last few years more than ever, I think, how to lock arms and do the work together. So let's just keep doing that.
Thank you all so much. I want to echo again, we are beyond honored to have you here with us today, providing such valuable resources and information. I'm going to go ahead and pass it back over to Sarah to introduce our surprise, super secret special guest who has arrived on screen with us.
Thank you so much, LaShawna. And everybody, please give it up for Julie and Anna and Dianna. Thank y'all. I wasn't on screen, but I was like snapping, clapping, smiling, gleaming through all the great knowledge that you folks were able to, share, and just your thoughts on a lot of things. And when it comes to abortion rights and queer justice and everything like that. So everybody, one more time, give it up for Julie, Anna, and Dianna. Thank you, folks. Well, folks, up next, we do have special remarks from a special guest today. And I want to bring them to the stage. So please welcome with remarks for LGBTQ Summit Part 2, our special guest, Vice President, Board of Supervisor, Susan Ellenberg. Take it away, Susan.
Hi, Sarah. Thank you for those of you who helped me get on today. Well, more than 2 years into Zoom, evidently it's still not always smooth as silk. So thank you all for being part of this really important LGBTQ plus summit on intersectionality today. Intersectionality to me is just a brilliant term that well captures the fact that none of us is represented by a single identity alone. We all hold sexual orientations and gender identities, pronoun preferences, race, ethnicity, class, nationality, and often faith simultaneously. And looking at any one of these aspects in isolation really does a disservice to the complexities we bring to every engagement, every interaction, and every situation. And I'll say it's fascinating to me that there are still societal expectations regarding which identities, quote, go together and which may appear to be externally at odds. And it can be exhausting, constantly having to counter the many inaccurate presumptions, biases, and lack of information that result from that siloed thinking. One role of government is to embed equity and intersectionality into our decision-making so that every person who falls within the jurisdiction of that government is actually represented and valued. In the first panel this morning, you heard about the impact of the Dobbs versus Jackson decision on abortion rights and how that negatively impacts the lives of LGBTQ plus people across the nation. It is chilling. There's no other word. It is chilling that the hard-won rights that we thought were secure can be overturned in a moment. Complacency is the new obscenity. Next, I know you're going to dive deeper into barriers to access that LGBTQ plus communities face when accessing vital resources. We cannot let down our guard. The fight continues for women, for people who can and may become pregnant, and for the LGBTQ community at large. Every year, between November 13th and 19th, people and organizations around the country participate in Transgender Awareness Week to raise the visibility of transgender people and to address issues that members of that community face every day, all year long. Then, on November 21st, the Transgender Day of Remembrance will honor the memory of transgender people whose lives were stolen in vicious acts of transgender violence. This month, the county, through the Office of LGBTQ Affairs, will be hosting a virtual town hall on new research exploring the range of challenges that transgender, non-binary, and gender-expansive community members in Santa Clara County face in their jobs and career paths. The town hall will provide deeper insights on barriers to employment, as well as positive workplace experiences, goals, and recommendations for supporting transgender, non-binary, and gender-expansive people in researching their full potential. Again, I just want to thank all of you for being here today, the Office of LGBTQ Affairs for putting this event together, and I hope that the summit experience is meaningful for all of you. And I'll pass it back to Sarah.
Thank you so much, Vice President Ellenberg. Everyone give it up for Vice President Ellenberg. Thank you for taking the time out, Supervisor, on being part of our LGBTQ Summit Part 2. We greatly appreciate you.
It is always an honor to be asked to participate. Thank you again, Sarah.
Thank you.